The night Eleanor first walked into a room that was not meant for her, she could feel it in the air. Not in a poetic way, in a very real, very physical way. The way a person feels when everyone around them is wearing the right clothes, and speaking the right language, and laughing at the right moments, and you are standing slightly off to one side, holding a glass of champagne you did not ask for, wondering how long you have to stay, before it becomes acceptable to leave. Eleanor Voss was 28 years old. She taught reading and writing to 9-year-olds at Hartfield Primary School, where the classrooms smelled like chalk dust and orange peel, and the windows were always fogged in winter. She lived in a 2-room flat above a dry cleaning shop on Clement Street. She cooked her own meals, repaired her own hems, and spent her Friday evenings marking exercise books with a red pen that she bought in packs of 6 from the stationery shop on the corner. Her life was small and honest and hers, and she had never once looked at it with shame. Until tonight. Her friend Patrice had insisted. Patrice worked as a junior events coordinator for the Whitmore Foundation, the charitable organization that hosted the annual gala every October in the grand ballroom of the Alderton Hotel. It was the event of the social season. Patrice had a spare invitation, because a colleague had cancelled at the last minute, and she had held it out to Eleanor on a Tuesday afternoon, with the kind of expression that said she already knew Eleanor would say no, and was daring her to say yes instead. Eleanor had said yes. Standing now in the entrance of the Alderton ballroom, she understood why she usually said no to things like this. The room was enormous. Crystal chandeliers hung from a ceiling that seemed too far away to be real, throwing light down onto tables covered in white linen, onto flower arrangements that must have cost more than Eleanor's monthly rent, onto women in gowns that shimmered when they moved, and men in dark suits that had been fitted to their shoulders, with the kind of precision that only came from tailors who charged by the hour. The music was live. A string quartet sat in the far corner, barely visible through the crowd, playing something that floated just above the noise of conversation, without ever demanding attention. Eleanor was wearing a navy dress she had bought 3 years ago for a colleague's wedding. It was a good dress. It had a simple cut, a modest neckline, and a hem that fell exactly to the knee. In any other room in the city, it would have been entirely appropriate. In this room, it was the kind of thing that made other women glance at her once and then look away, their expressions saying nothing at all, which said everything. Patrice appeared at her elbow with a warm smile and a second glass of champagne. Patrice was wearing a dark green gown and looked entirely at home, which Eleanor had always admired about her. Patrice could walk into any room and simply belong there, not because she was pretending to, but because she genuinely believed she had as much right to exist in it as anyone else. "You look wonderful," Patrice said, and she meant it, which helped. "I look like someone who teaches 9-year-olds, Eleanor said. "You are someone who teaches 9-year-olds. That is nothing to apologize for." Eleanor took a sip of her champagne. It was very good champagne. She was not going to think about how much it cost. They moved through the room together, Patrice stopping to greet people she knew from the foundation, introducing Eleanor as her dear friend, which Eleanor appreciated. No one asked what she did in a dismissive way. Most people were too interested in themselves to ask at all. Eleanor smiled at the right moments, said something brief and pleasant when required, and kept her back straight and her expression calm. She was good at composure. She had learned it the hard way, growing up in a household where you never knew which version of the evening you were going to get, and so you learned to read rooms quickly and keep your face arranged into something that gave nothing away. It was this skill, more than anything else, that made her notice the man before he noticed her. He was standing near the far end of the room, beside one of the tall windows that looked out onto the lit street below. He was talking to 2 other men, and from the way the other men were positioned, shoulders slightly turned toward him, chins angled in attention, it was obvious that he was the person whose opinion mattered in that conversation. He was tall, dark-haired, and dressed in a suit that fit him the way suits were supposed to fit, but rarely did. He was not the most handsome man in the room in the way that got you immediately noticed. His face was more interesting than that. It had angles that suggested he had spent time outdoors, and a jaw set at an angle that suggested he did not often say things twice. Eleanor looked away. She was not here for that kind of observation. Patrice was pulled away briefly by a colleague with a clipboard and an urgent expression. Eleanor found herself standing near the champagne table alone, which was perfectly fine. She was comfortable being alone. She looked at the flowers on the nearest table, which were white and pale gold, and thought about the cost of a single stem. You're looking at those flowers as though you're calculating something. She turned. The man from the window was standing 2 feet away, holding his own glass, looking at her with an expression that was curious rather than searching. I was calculating something, she said, because she was, and lying about it seemed unnecessarily complicated. What was the conclusion? That one arrangement would cover my grocery bill for a month, she said, possibly 6 weeks, if I was being careful. He looked at the flowers, then back at her. That's a very precise observation. I'm a precise person. Are you here with the foundation? I'm here with a friend who works for the foundation, Eleanor said. I'm a primary school teacher. She said it the way she always said it, in rooms like this, clearly and without apology. Because the moment you softened it was the moment you handed someone permission to look past you. He did not look past her. He looked at her more carefully, actually, as though she had said something that required reassessment. That's the most honest introduction I've had all evening, he said. It's the only kind I know how to give, she said. He put out his hand. Oliver Hargrove. She shook it. His grip was firm and brief, and did not linger. Eleanor Voss. Do you enjoy it? He asked. Teaching. Very much, she said. There's a particular expression a child gets when something clicks, when a word they've been struggling with suddenly makes sense to them. You can't manufacture that. You either see it or you don't. He was quiet for a moment in the way that meant he was actually listening, not just waiting for her to finish speaking. I've never thought about it that way, he said. Most people haven't, she said, and she was not being unkind, simply honest, and he seemed to understand the difference. They talked for a few more minutes. He asked about the school. She asked, because it seemed polite, what he did. He said he oversaw the family business, which was textile manufacturing, and he said it in the tone of a person who had given that answer many times and found it neither exciting nor embarrassing. She did not ask follow-up questions about the business because she could tell he did not particularly want to talk about it, and she had spent too many years listening to children to miss the signals when someone's interest shifted. They were interrupted by a woman in a red dress who appeared at Oliver's side with the certainty of someone who had been heading toward him from across the room for some time. She was beautiful in a very deliberate way. Her hair was arranged perfectly. Her jewelry was tasteful and expensive. She placed one hand lightly on Oliver's arm, in a gesture that was less affectionate than territorial. Oliver, the woman said, your mother is looking for you. Oliver's expression did not change, but something around his eyes shifted slightly. Thank you, Claudette. Claudette looked at Eleanor. Her gaze moved from Eleanor's face to her dress and back again in the space of a single second. It was a very efficient assessment, the kind that leaves no mark but draws blood anyway. I don't think we've met, Claudette said, with a smile that contained no warmth whatsoever. Eleanor Voss, Eleanor said, and kept her voice pleasant. Claudette said nothing to that. She simply looked back at Oliver and said, your mother, Oliver, and then moved away in the direction of the dance floor. Oliver turned back to Eleanor. I apologize for the interruption. There's nothing to apologize for, Eleanor said easily. Are you going to be here for the rest of the evening? I imagine so, she said. Patrice will want to stay until at least 10. He looked as though he was going to say something else. Then a man on his left touched his shoulder, murmuring something, and Oliver said, excuse me, and was drawn back into the current of the room. Eleanor turned back to the flowers and finished her champagne. She did not think much of it. He was a man at a party. She was a woman at a party. They had a conversation. It was interesting while it lasted. These things did not usually amount to more than that. She found Patrice again, near the far side of the room, and they moved through the rest of the early evening together, helping themselves to small plates of food from the buffet table, standing near the windows, and watching the dance floor fill up as the string quartet shifted to something livelier. Eleanor found herself enjoying the spectacle of it. The room was beautiful. The people in it were interesting to observe, the way people always were when they were performing the best version of themselves. She spotted Oliver twice across the room. Once he was speaking to an older woman who carried herself with the kind of authority that suggested she had never once in her life entered a room wondering if she belonged there. Once he was standing alone near the entrance to the corridor that led to the hotel lobby, looking at something on his watch with an expression that was slightly tired. He did not look her way either time. Eleanor was not disappointed by this. She had not expected him to. It was approaching 9 o'clock when Patrice was called away again, this time to help manage a small crisis involving the seating arrangements for the dinner portion of the evening. She pressed Eleanor's arm and said, 10 minutes, and disappeared through a side door. Eleanor made her way to the edge of the room, where it was slightly quieter, and stood near a tall arrangement of white flowers, watching the dancing. She was genuinely enjoying herself, now that the initial strangeness of the room had settled. There was a pleasure in being invisible in a crowd, in watching people move and talk and laugh without being required to participate. It was then that she heard her name. Not from someone speaking to her, from someone speaking nearby, to someone else, in the tone people use when they don't think they're being overheard. The Voss woman. Yes, her. She came in with Patrice Henley, but that's just the cover. I heard she specifically requested the introduction to Oliver last week. Apparently she's been tracking the Hargrove family events calendar. Eleanor did not move. She kept her eyes on the dance floor, and her face arranged into its practiced calm. A second voice, lower. She doesn't exactly look the part. That's the point, isn't it? The whole understated thing. Very calculated. Does Claudette know? Claudette is the one who told me. Eleanor set her champagne glass down very carefully on the nearest surface. The conversation moved away, carried by the drift of the crowd. She stood very still for a moment, and then she turned and walked toward the corridor that led to the powder room. Her face was steady. Her hands were steady. Inside, something had gone cold and tight, the way it always did when the world reminded her that no matter how composed she kept herself, there were people who would construct a story about her anyway, and that story would have nothing to do with who she actually was. She had heard worse. She had survived worse. She was going to walk down this corridor, stand in the powder room for 3 minutes, and then walk back out, and find Patrice, and tell her they could leave now. It had been a lovely evening, and she was tired. She pushed through the door to the corridor. It was quiet here, carpeted in deep red, lit by small wall sconces that gave the air a warm, amber quality. The sounds of the ballroom fell away behind her. She stopped walking. Because at the other end of the corridor, leaning against the wall near the lobby entrance, with his jacket still perfectly on, and his expression shifted into something that looked, for the first time all evening, genuinely uneasy, was Oliver Hargrove. He looked up when he heard her footsteps. For a moment, neither of them said anything. Eleanor had intended to walk straight past him to the powder room. She had intended to do exactly what she had told herself she was going to do, which was be very calm and very dignified and feel absolutely nothing in front of anyone. But he was looking at her the way you look at someone when you already know, and the thing about being looked at like that after you have just been discussed, like a problem to be managed, is that it is unexpectedly difficult to keep walking. She stopped. "Are you all right?" he asked, quietly, without any pretense. She looked at him for a moment. "Did you know," she asked, "that I apparently spent last week researching your family's event calendar so that I could engineer an introduction to you tonight?" He went very still. "I heard it from across the room," she said. "Someone was saying it to someone else. They were quoting Claudette." The quiet in the corridor deepened. Oliver straightened away from the wall. Something moved across his face that was not quite anger, but was in that neighborhood. "Eleanor," he said. "I'm not telling you this because I need you to do anything about it," she said carefully. "I'm telling you because I'm about to leave, and I didn't want to leave without telling someone the truth about what was being said, because keeping quiet about it felt worse than saying it out loud." She turned to walk back toward the ballroom, because the powder room no longer seemed necessary, and Patrice would be looking for her soon. She had taken exactly 2 steps when she heard the ballroom doors open from the inside, and the sound of the party poured into the corridor, and a group of guests moved through, and in the space of a single, confused moment, Eleanor found herself very close to Oliver in the narrow corridor, and the guests moved around them, and between them, in a way that pushed her slightly toward the wall, and Oliver stepped in to keep her from being jostled. And that was when someone from inside the ballroom looked through the open door and saw them. Not doing anything, just standing close together in a corridor, his hand briefly near her arm. But the way people see things at a party, after champagne, with a rumor already circulating. What they saw was something else entirely. The door swung closed again. Eleanor did not realize what had happened until Patrice appeared in the corridor 30 seconds later, her eyes very wide, and said, "Eleanor, there are people talking." Eleanor looked at Patrice. Patrice looked at Oliver. Oliver looked at nothing in particular, in the way a person looked when they were thinking very fast. "What are people saying?" Eleanor asked, in the careful tone she used when she already suspected the answer was not going to be simple. "They're saying," Patrice said, lowering her voice, "that you and Oliver Hargrove slipped away from the party together, and that it's been going on for longer than tonight." Eleanor closed her eyes for a single second. And then she opened them again, because closing your eyes never helped, and the situation was what it was, and she was going to have to figure out what to do next. The string quartet was still playing inside. The chandeliers were still throwing their warm light across the white linen tables. The flower arrangements were still magnificent and expensive. Eleanor Voss stood in a corridor, in a dress that cost less than a single stem of those flowers, and she thought about the 9-year-olds who would be sitting in her classroom on Monday morning, waiting for her, needing her, trusting her completely. And she thought about how none of that was visible to a single person on the other side of those ballroom doors. And that was the moment she understood that the evening was not going to end the way she had planned. The rumor did not stay in the corridor. It never did, in rooms like that. Rooms where everyone knew everyone, and the space between one conversation and the next was about 3 feet of carpeted floor. Rooms where information moved the way water moved, seeking every crack, finding every gap, filling the available space before you had even noticed it was flowing. Eleanor knew this. She had observed it all evening. She had watched the way Claudette moved through the crowd with the ease of someone who had been doing this particular kind of social management for years, planting a word here, a glance there, always moving, always smiling, always knowing exactly who was standing within earshot. What Eleanor had not understood, until now, was that she herself was the subject of that evening's project. She stood in the corridor, with Patrice's words still in the air between them, and she thought, with the clear, slightly cold clarity that sometimes came to her in difficult moments, that she had 2 options. She could leave. She could walk out of the Alderton Hotel right now, hail a cab on the street, go home to her flat above the dry cleaning shop, make herself a cup of tea, and be in bed by 9:30. By Monday she would be back in her classroom with her red pen and her chalk dust and her 9-year-olds, and this would be a story she told no one, because there was no version of telling it that did not make her sound either foolish or unfortunate, and she was tired of being either of those things. Or she could go back inside. She was still deciding when Oliver said quietly, "Go back in." She looked at him. "If you leave now," he said, "the story becomes you leaving with me." He was right. She hated that he was right, but he was. Patrice put a gentle hand on Eleanor's arm. "I'll stay with you," she said. "We'll go back in together, and we'll find a corner, and we'll stay there, and it will be fine." Eleanor straightened. She put her shoulders back. She had been putting her shoulders back in difficult moments since she was 12 years old, and it had not failed her yet. "Right," she said. They went back in. The difference was immediate and unmistakable. Not that anyone stared. In rooms like this, staring was considered coarse. Instead, there were the small adjustments, the angle of a head, the flicker of eyes toward her as she moved through the room, the conversations that did not quite pause but shifted somehow, the way a river shifts when you drop a stone into it. Eleanor kept her face pleasant and her posture easy, and moved with Patrice toward the far side of the room, where the crowd was slightly thinner. She could hear, not the words, but the shape of the words, the murmur that followed them, at a distance that was just far enough to be deniable. Oliver had come back in behind them and been absorbed almost immediately by his mother, who had materialized from somewhere near the main entrance with a precise and purposeful air. Eleanor noticed this. She did not look in that direction again. Patrice leaned close to her. "There's a woman in blue by the 3rd table. She's been watching you since we came back in." "I know," Eleanor said, because she had noticed too. "Do you know who she is?" "I haven't been here long enough to know who anyone is," Eleanor said. "Except Claudette." Patrice was quiet for a moment. "Claudette introduced herself to me last year when I started at the foundation. Very charming, very warm. She paused. The kind of warm that makes you feel slightly cold afterward. Eleanor almost smiled. I noticed that too. They stood together and watched the room. The dinner portion of the evening was beginning, guests finding their seats, the waitstaff beginning to move with the first course. Eleanor and Patrice were seated at a table near the side of the room that was clearly not the primary table, not close to the Whitmore Foundation board, but it was a table with real chairs and real food, and Eleanor was surprised to find that she was hungry. She sat down. She ate. She talked to the people at her table, who turned out to be interesting, a woman named Ruth, who ran a literacy charity, a retired architect named George, who had opinions about the hotel's ceiling moldings, a young couple, who had clearly been placed at the side table for reasons similar to Eleanor's, and who were trying to enjoy their evening in spite of it. Eleanor found that she liked all of them. She found that she was, genuinely, despite everything, having a reasonable time. It was only when dinner was clearing and the dancing was resuming that the evening tilted again. She had excused herself from the table and was walking toward the edge of the room, thinking she might find a quieter spot to stand for a few minutes before locating Patrice, when she nearly walked directly into Claudette. Claudette was standing with a small group of women, none of whom Eleanor recognized. They were all very polished. They all had the look of women who had been attending this event for years, and considered it territory they understood thoroughly. Claudette looked at Eleanor with the particular expression of someone who had been waiting for exactly this moment. Not hostile, perfectly composed, simply waiting. "Eleanor," she said, as though they were old friends. "Claudette," Eleanor said. "Are you enjoying the evening?" "Very much," Eleanor said. "I was just telling the girls," Claudette said, "about your school. Hartfield Primary, is it? How wonderful that you found the time to come tonight. I imagine school evenings are quite busy." The women around her made small sounds, not quite laughter, something more careful than that. Eleanor looked at Claudette with the steady, even patience she had developed over years of managing classrooms full of small people who were testing boundaries. She recognized a test when she encountered one. She recognized, also, when someone wanted a reaction and was prepared to wait for it. "Not so busy that I can't enjoy a beautiful evening," Eleanor said pleasantly. "The flowers here are extraordinary. Do you know who did the arrangements?" There was a very small pause. Claudette's smile did not waver. "I believe the foundation uses Halloway's. They're the best in the city." "They really are," Eleanor agreed. "Enjoy your evening, Claudette." She walked away. Her heart was doing something it was not supposed to be doing, but her face was perfectly calm. And by the time she had taken 10 steps, it was just a thing that had happened. One small thing, in an evening full of small things, none of them large enough to be worth carrying home. She found a spot near the windows, and stood there, and watched the room settle into the rhythm of dancing. The string quartet had been joined by a piano, and the music had taken on a warmer quality. Couples moved onto the floor. The conversation around the edges grew looser, easier, the way it always did, as an evening moved past the formal part, and into the part where people simply talked to each other. She was watching a very elderly couple dancing, with the easy certainty of people who had been doing it together for decades, when Oliver Hargrove appeared beside her. She did not look at him immediately. "I thought your mother needed you," she said. "My mother always needs me," he said. "I've learned to need 10-minute breaks." They stood side by side watching the dancing. "How bad is it?" she asked. He was quiet for a moment. "My mother has heard the story," he said. Eleanor absorbed this. "What version of it?" "The version in which you came here tonight, with the specific intention of meeting me." "And what did you tell her?" "That it is not true." "Did she believe you?" Another pause, a longer one. "My mother," Oliver said carefully, "tends to interpret the world in a particular way. She has a very organized sense of how things are, and how they should be, and when reality does not match her organization, she adjusts her interpretation of reality, rather than her organization." Eleanor processed this. "So she does not believe you." "She is choosing a different framework," he said, and there was something in his voice that was dry and tired and old, the tone of a person who has had a particular conversation many times, and has long since stopped expecting it to end differently. "I'm sorry," Eleanor said. "This is not your fault either." "None of it is your fault," he said. They were quiet again. The dancing couple Eleanor had been watching, the old ones, had moved to the center of the floor. They were dancing slowly, to something the piano was playing, something simple and lovely, and they were completely absorbed in it, oblivious to the room around them. "How long have they been married?" Eleanor asked. Oliver looked. "The Beresfords? 53 years, I think. They come every year. They always dance exactly like that." Eleanor watched them. "That is extraordinary," she said, and meant it. The evening wore on. Patrice found Eleanor eventually, and they stood together for a while longer, and then Patrice said she needed to help with the end-of-evening logistics, and Eleanor said she would wait for her near the entrance. She collected her coat from the coat check and stood near the lobby doors, watching the crowd begin to thin. It was there that she heard the second version of the story. She was not the only one near the lobby. A cluster of guests was nearby, waiting for their own coats, and they were talking with the unguarded ease of people who had had a lot of champagne and assumed no one was listening. "The teacher," one of them was saying. "Apparently, she had her friend from the foundation get her a ticket specifically." "How do you know?" Claudette told Marjorie at dinner. "The whole thing was arranged. She has been trying to get into the Hargrove orbit for months. Oliver is too polite to have seen it coming. Margaret will put a stop to it." Eleanor stood very still. Her coat was over her arm. Her bag was in her hand. She was looking at the revolving door that led out to the street, where it was raining lightly, and the wet pavement was orange lit under the street lamps, and she was thinking about what it meant to be discussed like a problem that other people needed to solve. She had spent her whole life being underestimated, being looked past, being assigned a story by people who had not bothered to ask her for the real one. She was used to it. She had learned to carry it without letting it slow her down. But there was a difference between being looked past and being actively constructed, having a version of yourself invented and handed around a room while you were standing in it, and that difference tonight felt sharper than usual. She heard the ballroom doors open behind her and turned. Oliver was crossing the lobby toward her. He was moving with purpose, as though he had been looking for her. "Eleanor," he said. "I'm waiting for Patrice," she said. "I'm going home soon." "I know," he said. He stopped a few feet away. "I want to tell you something." She looked at him, waiting. "I'm not sorry I spoke to you tonight," he said. "I want that to be clear. Whatever the rest of this becomes, whatever my mother decides about it, or Claudette says about it, I am not sorry we talked. You were the most honest conversation I had all evening." Eleanor looked at him for a long moment. The noise of the room was behind them both, muffled by distance. The rain was still doing what rain did, against the glass of the lobby doors. "That is a kind thing to say," she said. "I mean it." "I know you do," she said. "That is actually what makes it kind." Patrice appeared from the direction of the cloakroom, her coat on, her bag over her shoulder, looking slightly frazzled and ready to leave. "There you are," she said to Eleanor, and then to Oliver. "Mr. Hargrove, thank you for a lovely evening." "Thank you for coming," he said. Eleanor put on her coat. She looked at Oliver once more. "Good night," she said. "Good night, Eleanor," he said. She walked out through the revolving door into the rain. The cold air was very clean after the warmth of the ballroom. The street was quiet. A cab was passing, and Patrice flagged it down. Eleanor got in, and the cab door closed, and the Alderton Hotel slid away behind them through the wet streets, and Eleanor sat in the back seat and looked out the window and thought about nothing particular, because sometimes that was the only thing to do. She did not think it was over. She was right. The morning the newspaper arrived, Margaret Hargrove was already at the dining table. She had been there since 7:30, which was unusual. Margaret was a woman who believed in a proper breakfast, served properly, at a proper hour, which in her household meant 8 o'clock. She had been following this schedule for longer than Oliver had been alive. The fact that she had broken it this morning told him, before he had even cleared the doorway, that the morning was not going to be ordinary. He smelled coffee. He heard the precise sound of a newspaper being folded and placed very deliberately on the table. He came through the door. Margaret was sitting in her usual chair at the head of the table, with her back very straight and her hands folded in front of her, and the morning newspaper lying beside her plate, folded open to a page he could not see from the doorway. She looked at him when he came in. She had a particular look, not angry. Margaret Hargrove almost never looked angry. She looked measured. She looked like a woman who had taken the full weight of a situation and was now preparing to place it on the appropriate scale. Oliver went to the sideboard and poured his coffee. He was not going to rush this. Whatever the morning had decided to be, rushing it never helped. He sat down across from her. He drank his coffee. He looked at her and waited. She slid the newspaper across the table to him. It was the society column. He had known it would be. The society column of the Whitmore Gazette had been covering the annual Hargrove family appearances at the Alderton Gala for longer than he could remember, because the Whitmore Foundation and the Hargrove family had a long financial relationship that made the Hargroves perennial fixtures in these pages every October. The column this morning was not long. It did not need to be. There was a photograph, taken, he could see, somewhere in the vicinity of the lobby, slightly blurred but clear enough, that showed him and Eleanor standing close together in the corridor, and beneath it, a headline he read once and then set down. He looked back at his mother. "It was not what it looks like," he said. "Oliver," she said. "She is a primary school teacher named Eleanor Voss, who came to the event as a guest of Patrice Henley. We had a conversation at the champagne table. We spoke again briefly near the lobby. The photograph is misleading." Margaret looked at the newspaper, then at her son. "It says," she said, very carefully, "that you have been seen together on previous occasions." "That is false," he said. "The column suggests." "The column is repeating a rumor that was started by Claudette," he said, "at the event, last night." There was a silence. Margaret did not move. Oliver knew his mother well enough to understand what that stillness meant. It meant she was filing things away, sorting them, placing them in the organizational structure she maintained for every piece of information that came her way. Margaret Hargrove did not react. She processed, and when she was finished processing, she acted. "Claudette," she said, after a moment. "Yes." "And why," she asked, "would Claudette do that?" "Because Claudette is angry," Oliver said. "Because I declined to proceed with what she and you both had in mind 2 years ago, and because she has decided to express that anger by making a problem for someone who did not deserve one." She touched the edge of it with one finger, very gently, as though the paper itself might tell her something. "This woman," she said. "Eleanor Voss." "Yes." "Where does she live?" Oliver set down his coffee. "Mother, I am asking a simple question." "You are not asking a simple question," he said. "There is no simple question here. You are asking where she lives, so that you can make a determination about whether or not she is an appropriate subject for this family's concern, and I am telling you that she is not a subject. She is a person. She came to a party. She had a conversation. And now she is in a newspaper, because Claudette decided she needed to be, and I am not going to allow that to stand." Margaret was quiet. "You are not going to allow it," she said. "No," he said. His mother picked up her coffee cup. She drank from it slowly. She set it back down with the same precision she brought to every action in her life. "She is a primary school teacher," she said again. "Yes." "From Clement Street," Margaret said, and Oliver went still, because that meant his mother had already known that before this conversation began, which meant his mother had already made inquiries, which meant the morning was considerably further along than he had thought. "You have already spoken to someone," he said. "I had a very brief conversation with a member of the foundation board this morning," Margaret said, which meant she had been on the telephone before 7. "I wanted to understand the situation." Oliver looked at his mother for a long moment. He thought about Eleanor standing in the lobby last night with her coat over her arm and her chin up and her face perfectly composed, despite everything that had been said about her in that room. He thought about the way she had told him, without drama and without appeal, that she was telling him what had been said, because staying quiet about it felt wrong, not because she wanted him to fix it, simply because she believed in saying true things. "Oliver," his mother said, and her voice had shifted slightly into the register she used when she was preparing to say something important. "I understand that this situation is complicated. I understand that you feel some responsibility toward this woman, because of circumstances that were not her doing. But this," she indicated the newspaper, "requires a response, not from me, from you." "What kind of response?" he said. "The public has seen that photograph," she said. "The column has given it a story. If you do nothing, the story becomes the truth. The story is not the truth." Oliver, his mother's voice was patient and implacable, the way it had always been, when she was telling him something she considered to be simply, inarguably the case. "In 30 years of managing this family's public life, I have learned one thing with absolute certainty. The truth is what people repeat. And right now, what people are repeating is in that newspaper." He looked at the newspaper. He looked at the slightly blurred photograph. He thought about the way Claudette had placed her hand on his arm last night, and the look on Eleanor's face when she told him what she had heard. "What are you suggesting?" he said. His mother was quiet for a long moment. The house was very quiet around them. The kitchen staff were already at work in the back, the small domestic sounds of a household beginning its day muffled by distance. "I'm suggesting," Margaret said, "that you pay a call." He looked at her. "To Miss Voss," she said. "Today." "To say what?" he said. "To clarify the situation," she said, "in whatever way seems appropriate. Given the circumstances." Oliver looked at his mother for a long time. He understood what she was saying beneath what she was saying. He understood that in the language his mother used, clarify the situation, and pay a call, had meanings that were more specific than they appeared. He understood that his mother, who had been managing the public life of this family since she was 24 years old, and had not once in that time allowed a situation to develop without addressing it promptly, had looked at that newspaper and made a calculation. He was not sure how he felt about that calculation. He was not sure the calculation was wrong. He pushed back his chair and stood up. "I'll go this afternoon," he said. His mother nodded once, the way she nodded when she had achieved what she set out to achieve, and saw no need to discuss it further. Oliver went upstairs. He stood at the window in his study for a while, looking out at the street below, where the rain from last night had left the pavement clean and dark. He thought about what he was going to say when he arrived at an apartment on Clement Street, above a dry cleaning shop. He did not have a plan. He had, in his experience, found that plans for conversations like this tended to dissolve the moment the conversation actually began, because the person you were planning to talk to never quite behaved the way the plan assumed they would. Eleanor Voss, in his limited experience of her, seemed particularly unlikely to behave the way any plan assumed. He thought about what she had said at the champagne table, about the flowers, about the expression on a child's face when something clicked. He thought about her walking away from him in the lobby with her coat over her arm, and her shoulders set and her face composed, and the way she had looked at the rain on the glass doors before she went out into it. He picked up the telephone. He called the Hartfield Primary School administrative office and asked, with as little information as possible, what time the school day ended. 3:15, the woman on the telephone told him, in the tone of someone who found the question slightly strange. He thanked her and replaced the receiver. He had a few hours. He sat at his desk and looked at the work that was waiting for him there, and did approximately none of it. His mind was not on the textile contracts. It was on a corridor in the Alderton Hotel, and a conversation that had been honest in a way he had not expected and had not known, until it happened, that he was missing. At 2 o'clock he got into his car. At 3:15 he was standing on the pavement outside Hartfield Primary School, watching the children come out through the gates in pairs and clusters, reunited with their parents and grandparents, their voices loud and immediate in the damp afternoon air. He had not thought this through as well as he might have. He stood at what he hoped was a respectful distance from the gate and felt extremely conspicuous, which was not a feeling he was accustomed to. He was used to being the person who owned the room. He was not used to being the person standing on a pavement outside a primary school, trying not to look like he was doing exactly what he was doing. Eleanor came through the gate at 3:25, carrying a bag that was visibly full of books and papers, and wearing a coat that was different from last night's coat, a practical dark green one. She was talking to another teacher, a red-haired woman who was gesturing at something in the street with a key. Eleanor spotted him when she was about 15 feet away. She stopped. The other teacher noticed, and looked at Oliver with an expression that went from curious to interested very quickly. Eleanor said something brief and quiet to her colleague, who gave Eleanor a look of considerable meaning, and then walked away with a very deliberate air of minding her own business. Eleanor walked toward Oliver. She stopped 2 feet away from him and looked at him steadily. "You have seen the newspaper," she said. "Yes," he said. "So has everyone in my building," she said. "My neighbor, Mrs. Howell, brought it up with her morning scones." "I'm sorry," he said. "Mrs. Howell was more excited than apologetic," Eleanor said. "But that is beside the point." She looked at him clearly. "Why are you here, Oliver?" He had not had a plan. He had known he would not have a plan. He had been right. "I don't know how to fix this," he said. "I don't know what the right thing to do is, but I know that you are in a newspaper this morning because of something that happened in my world, and I am not the kind of person who can simply allow that and say nothing." Eleanor looked at him. Her expression was thoughtful and slightly tired, the way people looked at the end of a school day when they had been giving their full attention to other people for 7 straight hours. "Come on then," she said. "Where?" he said. "There is a tea shop on the next street," she said. "You can tell me what you are thinking over tea, which is considerably more civilized than a pavement." He fell into step beside her. They walked in silence for a moment. The street was quiet, except for the sound of a bus somewhere nearby, and the thin, persistent wind that came off the canal 2 blocks over. "Is it very bad?" she asked. "The newspaper." "Manageable," he said. "For you," she said. "Or for me?" He considered this honestly. "For my family, the situation is something my mother considers requiring a response," he said. "For you, I imagine it depends on who your colleagues read." "Miss Lawson read it," Eleanor said. "That was Miss Lawson just now. She has read everything that has ever been printed in every newspaper, and considers it her civic duty to share each item with all interested parties." "Is she going to be a problem?" "Miss Lawson is not a problem. She is simply very engaged with the world," Eleanor said. "The question is whether the head teacher has seen it." Oliver said nothing. He did not know what to say to that. The tea shop was warm and slightly steamy, and smelled of scones and something with cinnamon. They took a table near the window. Eleanor ordered tea for both of them, without asking him what he wanted, which he found, strangely, not presumptuous, but reassuring, as though she had already decided he was a person who needed tea, and was acting accordingly. She folded her hands on the table and looked at him. "Tell me what your mother said," she said. He told her. He was honest about it, which was the only way he knew how to be with her, having discovered the previous evening that honesty was the only register she responded to. He told her about the newspaper, about his mother's calm and implacable processing, about the phrase, "clarify the situation," and what it meant beneath its surface. Eleanor listened without interrupting. When he finished, she picked up her tea and held the cup in both hands the way people did when they needed something steady to hold. "She wants you to propose to me," Eleanor said. "She wants me to pay a call," he said, "which in my mother's language means the same thing," Eleanor said. "Yes, I understand." She looked out the window at the street. Oliver watched her face. She was not frightened. She was not flattered. She was doing what he had already observed she did when faced with something difficult. She was thinking about it with the same serious, unhurried attention she probably brought to everything. "I am going to be very honest with you," she said finally. "Please," he said. "I don't want to marry anyone, because a newspaper says I should," she said. "I don't want to marry anyone because of a rumor, or a photograph, or because your mother has decided it is the appropriate response to a social situation. Those are not reasons. Those are pressures." "I know," he said. "And I also don't want to have my life arranged for me by other people," she said, "which is what this feels like. What all of this feels like. As though a set of circumstances that had nothing to do with what I wanted or chose has now written a story about me, and is asking me to live in it." "I know," he said again, "and I don't disagree." She looked at him. "But," she said, because she could hear the but. "But," he said, "I am also aware that I cannot simply walk away from this and leave you in a newspaper story that you did not put yourself in. That is not something I can do." "You could," she said. "People do it all the time." "Not people I respect myself for being," he said. Eleanor looked at him for a long moment. The tea shop hummed gently around them. Somewhere near the counter, someone was laughing at something. "You should go," she said. "All right," he said. "And I need to think," she said. "Of course," he said. He paid for the tea. She did not argue about it, which told him she had already decided that particular argument was not worth having tonight. He stood up. He put on his coat. "Oliver," she said. He looked at her. "Come back tomorrow," she said. "I will think tonight, and you can come back tomorrow." He nodded. He went to the door. "And for what it is worth," she said, when he had his hand on the latch, "I don't blame you. For any of it. I want that to be clear." He turned and looked at her. She was still sitting at the table with both hands around her teacup, and the afternoon light coming through the window behind her, and she looked entirely like what she was, a person who was dealing with something difficult, and was going to deal with it with or without anyone's help, but who was, at least for now, leaving the door open. "Thank you," he said. "Don't thank me yet," she said. "Come back tomorrow." He went out into the street. He stood for a moment in the cold air, and then he started walking back toward where he had left the car, and he thought about tomorrow with something that was not quite anxiety, and not quite anticipation, but was something between the two that had no name he could find at the moment. He thought about it all the way home. She sent him away 3 times. That was how it went. And later when people asked him, because people always asked, once the whole story had come out the way stories like this eventually do, he told them that she sent him away 3 times, and each time he came back, and each time the conversation moved slightly further forward than the last one, until the 4th visit produced an answer that was not the answer he had expected, and was somehow, precisely because of that, the right one. The first time, the day after the tea shop, Eleanor opened the door to her flat, looked at him standing in the hallway above the dry cleaning shop, and said she had thought about it, and the answer was no. He had expected this. "May I ask why?" he said. "Because I will not enter into something that was designed by a set of circumstances rather than a set of genuine reasons," she said. "I have worked very hard to build a life that is mine. I am not going to trade it for one that was invented by a newspaper and a rumor, and your mother's concept of social management. Those are not the reasons I am here," he said. She looked at him steadily. "Then why are you here?" He thought about it. Genuinely thought about it. Standing in the hallway with the faint smell of dry cleaning chemicals in the air, and the distant sound of the street below. "Because I think you are the most interesting person I have met in a very long time," he said. "And I think this situation, as bad as it is also an opportunity that I would be a fool to ignore, and I don't want to be a fool." Eleanor looked at him. "Come back tomorrow," she said, and closed the door. He came back the next day. This time she let him in. The flat was small and clean and full of books, on shelves, on the table, on the windowsill, arranged with the pragmatic organization of someone who read constantly and had long since made peace with the space books required. There was a single large window that looked out over the street, and on the sill there was a small plant that had been carefully tended. She made tea without asking. He was beginning to understand that tea was how she began difficult conversations, something to do with her hands, something to put on the table between them. They sat across from each other at the kitchen table. "Tell me what the arrangement would actually mean," she said, "in practice, not in theory." He told her, honestly. He told her that he was not looking for a performance of marriage, dinner parties and jewelry, and the appearance of domestic happiness assembled for the benefit of his mother's social circle. He told her that he understood she had a life and work she valued, and that he had no interest in dismantling either. He told her that the townhouse on Alverton Square was large enough that they could each have their own rooms, their own mornings, their own evenings when evenings needed to be their own. "And the times when they do not?" she asked. "Dinner," he said. "When it matters. Events. When they cannot be avoided." "How often is that?" 4, maybe 5 times a month. She wrapped both hands around her cup. "And what do you actually want?" she said. "Not what the situation requires. Not what your mother has decided. What do you, Oliver Hargrove, actually want from this?" The question was so direct and so simple, and so entirely unafraid, that it caught him slightly off balance, the way honest questions sometimes did. "I want," he said slowly, "to find out whether the conversation we had at that champagne table was the beginning of something, or just a very good evening." She looked at him. "That is a different answer than I expected," she said. "I know," he said. She was quiet for a while. She looked out the window at the street. He let her be quiet, because he had already understood that this was not a woman you hurried. "Come back tomorrow," she said again. He came back the next day. She did not open the door immediately. He waited in the hallway for almost 2 minutes, long enough to wonder whether she was not going to answer. Then the lock turned, and she opened the door, and she was wearing what were clearly her work clothes still. She had come straight from school, and she looked tired, in the particular way that people who give everything to their work look at the end of a full week. "I have been thinking," she said. "I know," he said. "May I come in?" She stepped back. They sat at the kitchen table again. No tea this time, which he took as a sign that this conversation was different in nature from the others. "If I say yes," she said, "I want it understood from the beginning that I continue teaching. Full stop, no negotiation." "Understood," he said. "I want my own rooms, my own mornings, my own reading time." "Yes," he said. "I don't want to be managed," she said. "I don't want to be presented. I don't want to be given a list of appropriate things to say at appropriate events. I am a person, not a public relations strategy." "Agreed," he said. She looked at him. Her expression was serious and clear, and entirely characteristic of everything he had observed about her. "And I want honesty," she said. "Whatever else this is or is not, I want it to be honest. If something is not working, we say so. If something needs to change, we say so. We don't perform happiness we don't have." "That is all I want," he said. She was quiet for a moment longer. "And if," she said, "at some point down the road, this arrangement has become something other than an arrangement. If either of us needs something different, we say that too." He looked at her. "Yes," he said. She folded her hands on the table. She looked at them for a moment. Then she looked up at him. "All right," she said. He stayed very still. "All right?" "Yes," she said. "But I want to be clear. I am not doing this because of the newspaper, and I am not doing it because of your mother. I am doing it because I am tired," she said. And there was something very honest and slightly raw in her voice now. Something she had perhaps not entirely planned to show him, of other people deciding who I am. "I am tired of walking into rooms where the story about me has already been written before I arrive. If I am going to be in a story, I would rather write it myself." Oliver looked at her for a long moment. "That," he said quietly, "is the most compelling reason for anything I have ever heard." The corner of her mouth moved, just barely. It was not quite a smile, but it was something. She stood up. He stood up. "I will need a week to arrange things at school," she said. "I will need to speak to the head teacher." "Of course," he said. "And we are going to do this properly," she said, quietly, "with a minimum of your mother's orchestration." "I will do what I can," he said. "Do better than that," she said. He almost smiled. "I will try." She walked him to the door. He turned, once, in the hallway. "Eleanor," he said. "Yes," she said. "Thank you," he said, "for taking me seriously." She looked at him with those steady, clear eyes. "Don't make me regret it," she said. "I don't intend to," he said. He went down the stairs and out into the street. The day was gray and cold and entirely ordinary. He stood on the pavement for a moment and breathed. He had the distinct and somewhat unsettling sense that his life had just changed in a way that was both smaller and larger than he had anticipated. He thought about that on the drive home. He was still thinking about it when he sat down across from his mother at dinner that evening and told her. Margaret listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Good," in the tone of a person who has achieved an objective and sees no need to celebrate it. "It is not going to be the way you are imagining it," Oliver said. "It never is," his mother said, and returned to her soup. Oliver looked at her. He thought about Eleanor's face when she had said she was tired of other people deciding who she was. He thought about his own face when she had said it, and the way something in him had recognized the feeling entirely. He picked up his fork. Tomorrow was going to be different from today. That was, he decided, not something to be afraid of. The wedding was on a Thursday. Oliver had suggested a Thursday because Thursdays were, statistically and practically, the day when the fewest people were paying attention to anything. The social calendars of the city's prominent families were built around Fridays and Saturdays, and no one significant to either of their worlds was likely to be watching a quiet register office on a Thursday afternoon in November. Eleanor had agreed to Thursday for exactly the same reasons, and the agreement itself had felt characteristic of the kind of conversation they were apparently going to have for the foreseeable future. Honest, direct, and arriving at the same conclusion by slightly different routes. There were 12 people present. Margaret Hargrove, who wore dark blue and spoke to no one she was not required to speak to, but who showed up, which Oliver noted privately was its own kind of acknowledgement. Patrice, who stood next to Eleanor and cried very quietly at the exact moment the registrar said the word witness, and then composed herself with admirable speed. Oliver's business partner, a steady and practical man named Edward, who signed what needed to be signed, and then went back to the office because there was apparently a contract situation in the afternoon. Eleanor's colleague, Miss Lawson, whose first name was Vera, Oliver learned, who attended with the energy of someone who had been waiting for this day since the moment Eleanor had shown her the newspaper, and had never once doubted it would come. It was not cold, for November, which Eleanor pointed out afterward was a small mercy. Oliver said it was a sign. She looked at him and said she did not particularly believe in signs, and he said that was all right. He would believe in them for both of them. She had not expected that. He could tell by the way her expression changed, very slightly, before she composed it again. They went to lunch afterward, the 12 of them, at a restaurant that Patrice had chosen because it was warm, and the food was good, and no one there cared who anyone was. It was the most relaxed Oliver had been in months, which was not something he had anticipated. He sat beside Eleanor, and they ate and talked, and the lunch stretched out in the comfortable, easy way that a good meal does when the people around it are not performing anything. Eleanor laughed, properly, twice. Once at something Vera Lawson said about a child at the school. Once at something Edward said about a business trip to Edinburgh that had gone comprehensively wrong. Each time she laughed, Oliver found himself paying attention to it, in the way you paid attention to something you had not heard before, and found you wanted to hear again. They drove to the townhouse on Alverton Square that afternoon. Eleanor had moved the necessary things over during the previous week, and Oliver had arranged for the rest to follow. She had been given, as agreed, the 2 rooms on the upper right side of the house, which had their own sitting room and a bedroom that looked out over the garden. He had asked her if she wanted to change anything about them. She had walked through both rooms once, slowly, looking at the walls and the windows and the arrangement of furniture, and said only that she wanted to move the chair so it faced the window instead of the wall, which the housekeeper, Mrs. Fenn, accomplished within the hour. That first evening, they ate dinner together at the long table in the dining room, which was slightly too large for 2 people, but became less so once the places were set near one end. Mrs. Fenn had made something that was warm and substantial, and required no ceremony, which Eleanor seemed to appreciate. Oliver poured the wine. Eleanor picked up her glass and looked at it for a moment. "This is strange," she said. "Yes," he said. "Is it strange for you too?" she asked. "Considerably," he said. She seemed reassured by this, not in a way that made the strangeness smaller, but in the way that shared strangeness was preferable to strangeness experienced alone. They talked through dinner, not about the marriage or the arrangement or what it meant. They talked about his work, which was genuinely interesting once he stopped using the language he normally used for it, and just described what actually happened. He told her about a supplier problem in the north that had required 3 trips and considerable patience. She asked good questions. She listened to the answers. She told him about a boy in her class named Arthur who had, in September, been completely unable to read a single sentence independently, and who had 2 weeks ago read aloud an entire paragraph from a book about trains, with a confidence that had made Eleanor have to turn briefly to the window. Oliver found himself listening to this with the same attention he gave to things that mattered. After dinner, Eleanor said she had marking to do, and excused herself with a practical and entirely unapologetic air that he found he did not mind at all. He sat in the study with his work papers for an hour, and then went to bed. He lay in the dark and thought about the evening. It had been strange. It had been quiet. It had been, beneath both of those things, strangely comfortable, like the first night in a house you were not yet sure about but could imagine, with time, being at home in. In the morning, Eleanor was already at the breakfast table when he came down, which surprised him. She was in her work clothes and was reading something, one of the exercise books from her bag, he saw, with a cup of tea beside her, and a piece of toast she had eaten half of and forgotten. She looked up when he came in. "Good morning," she said. "Good morning," he said. They were quiet for a moment. "I am going to be home at 4, she said. "I have a staff meeting, but it should not go past 3:30. "All right," he said. "Tuesdays and Thursdays," she said, which was their agreement for shared dinners. "Yes," he said. She nodded and went back to her exercise book. Oliver poured his coffee and sat down and looked at the morning newspaper, which today did not have anything about either of them in it, which was a considerable improvement on the last time he had opened it. He thought about all the mornings that were coming. He thought about the fact that he did not know what any of them would look like, except that they would be something like this: quiet, ordinary, a little strange, moving forward. He folded the newspaper. Eleanor had gone back to marking. There was a small frown of concentration between her brows. Her tea was getting cold. She had not noticed. Oliver got up, took her cup to the kitchen, refilled it from the kettle, and brought it back. She looked up when he set it down. "Thank you," she said. And then, as though the detail had just reached her, "You did not have to do that. You were not going to do it yourself," he said. She looked at him for a moment. Then she looked back at the exercise book. But something had shifted very slightly in the quality of the morning. He could not have said exactly what it was. He was not entirely sure it needed saying. He sat back down and opened the newspaper, and the townhouse settled around them both, in the quiet, ordinary, slightly strange way that a new thing settles when it is deciding whether or not it is going to become familiar. The first week passed like this, then the second. They were careful with each other, the way careful people were when they were sharing space they were not sure of yet. Eleanor left for school at 7:40 each morning. Oliver left for the office at 8:30. They came home at different times and occupied the house in the parallel, separate rhythms of two people who were accustomed to living alone and had not yet found the places where their rhythms intersected. The first intersection happened entirely by accident. It was a Sunday, which was not one of their dinner nights, and which both of them were spending in the house without particular plans. Oliver was in the study with the quarterly reports. Eleanor was presumably in her rooms. Somewhere around 11 in the morning, Oliver needed a reference book that was on the third shelf of the library, which required a ladder, which required some rearrangement of the furniture beneath the bookshelf, and in the course of this rearrangement, he knocked over a second book, which knocked over a third, which produced a sound substantial enough to bring Eleanor to the library doorway, with an expression that asked whether something had gone wrong. "Nothing is wrong," he said, from the floor, where he was collecting the fallen books. "I knocked a shelf." She came in and helped him pick up the books. They stayed in the library for the next 3 hours. Not by plan. Simply because she had picked up one of the books and read a passage aloud to make a point about something, and then he had said something about the point, and then she had sat down in the chair she had moved, to face the window, and he had stayed on the floor, with his back against the bookcase, and they had talked, properly, without agenda, about nothing that needed to be discussed, and everything that interested them. She had opinions, real ones, not polished for social presentation, but actual working opinions that came from things she had read and thought about and tested against her experience. She disagreed with him twice, and was entirely comfortable doing so. He found himself arguing back, with more energy than he had brought to a conversation, in a very long time. When Mrs. Fenn appeared in the doorway at 2 o'clock to ask about lunch, she found them both exactly where they had been for 3 hours, and looked at them, with the particular expression of a person who was filing something away for later reference. Eleanor noticed the expression, and caught Oliver's eye. The corner of her mouth moved. He felt something shift, very small and very definite, in the air between them. They ate lunch at the kitchen table, because the dining room seemed too formal for a Sunday in November, and then Oliver went back to the quarterly reports, and Eleanor went back to her rooms, and the house resumed its quiet. But it was a slightly different quiet than it had been that morning. Oliver noticed this, the way you noticed a room that had been rearranged while you were out. Not dramatically different, not calling attention to itself, just subtly, no longer exactly where things were before. He put this observation in the part of his mind that filed things to be thought about later, and went back to the quarterly reports. That evening, the first Wednesday since the wedding, which was not a dinner night, Eleanor knocked on the study door at 7 and offered him a cup of tea because she was making one. He said yes. She brought it in and set it on his desk and looked briefly at the papers spread across it, with the same assessing quality she had turned on the flowers at the gala. "That looks like a lot," she said. "It is manageable," he said. "Good night," she said. "Good night, Eleanor," he said. She left. He drank the tea. He worked for another 2 hours with the quiet of the house around him, and he thought, briefly, and without particular analysis, that whatever this was going to be, it was already somewhat better than what he had expected. He went to bed. He slept well. This, also, was not what he had expected, but he was beginning to understand that Eleanor Voss had a quality that was difficult to articulate and very easy to feel. She made the immediate air around her more honest somehow, and honest air, it turned out, was surprisingly restful to breathe. He did not tell her this. It was too early for that kind of observation, and he was not sure she would know what to do with it yet. But he thought it, and that, for now, seemed like enough. Claudette had a gift for appearing in places where her presence created the maximum amount of difficulty. Eleanor had noticed this at the gala, when Claudette had materialized at Oliver's elbow at the exact moment the conversation was becoming interesting, and she filed it away as information. Not a warning to herself exactly. Simply data, the way a careful observer collected data about rooms and the people who moved through them. So when Patrice called on a Thursday evening in late November, nearly 6 weeks after the wedding, and said, slightly breathless, "You know the Whitmore Foundation Literacy Committee? The one I mentioned needs a community representative." Eleanor heard the tone in her friend's voice, and waited. "Claudette Barrow joined it last week," Patrice said. There was a pause. "As in," Eleanor said. "As in she is now on the committee you have just agreed to chair," Patrice said. Eleanor stood at the window of her sitting room, looking out at the garden below where the November frost had settled onto the grass, and she thought about this with the same deliberate attention she brought to anything that required it. "Is she on it for the literacy work?" Eleanor asked. "Claudette Barrow," Patrice said, "has never in her life attended a function for which the announced purpose was the actual purpose." "That is what I thought," Eleanor said. She went to the first committee meeting on a Wednesday. The room was a conference room at the Foundation's offices, bright and warm, with a long table and chairs, and a view of the street below. There were 8 people on the committee. Eleanor knew Patrice and 2 others from their connection to the Foundation. The remaining 3 she was meeting for the first time. And Claudette. Claudette arrived last, which Eleanor understood was also deliberate, and took the seat directly across the table from Eleanor, which was the seat that produced the maximum amount of eye contact whether anyone wanted it or not. She smiled at Eleanor when she sat down. The smile was warm, in exactly the way that Patrice had described, the warmth that left you slightly cold afterward. "Eleanor," she said, "how lovely." "Claudette," Eleanor said pleasantly. The meeting proceeded normally. Eleanor chaired it as she chaired everything, clearly, efficiently, giving each person at the table space to contribute. She had run parent evenings and staff meetings and classroom discussions for years. She knew how to keep a room productive. Claudette was quiet for most of the meeting. She asked 2 questions. Both were perfectly reasonable questions. Both were asked in a way that contained, inside their reasonableness, a small implicit suggestion that Eleanor's experience of primary education might be somewhat limited in scope compared to the kind of broader organizational expertise the committee required. Eleanor answered both questions, as she answered every question in every professional context, with clarity, specificity, and a complete absence of defensiveness. The third time Claudette asked a question, Eleanor answered it, and then moved the conversation forward, in a way that made going back to the same point seem, without anyone being able to say quite why, unnecessary. Claudette was quiet after that. The meeting ended. People gathered their things. Claudette was the last to stand, and as people filed past her toward the door, she touched Eleanor's arm lightly. "I am so glad you have taken on this role," she said. "It is such important work." "It is," Eleanor agreed. "It must be quite an adjustment," Claudette said. "All of this, the foundation, Alverton Square, the social commitments, quite different from Clement Street." It was said very pleasantly. It was also a very specific inventory. She knew the address of Eleanor's old flat. She knew the name of the square. She knew which parts of Eleanor's life represented the adjustment, and which were being held up as the original version that did not quite belong. Eleanor looked at Claudette with the steady patience she had spent 11 years developing, in rooms where someone was testing the edges of something. "I have always adapted well to new environments," Eleanor said. "It comes from teaching. You learn to read a room very quickly, and to work well in it." She picked up her bag. "It was good to see you, Claudette. I will send the minutes by Thursday." She walked out. In the hallway she passed Patrice, who fell into step beside her and said, very quietly, "Well handled." "She is going to be a persistent problem," Eleanor said. "Yes," Patrice agreed. "I know," Eleanor said. "I just wanted to say it out loud to someone, so I could then stop thinking about it." Patrice smiled, said, and witnessed. They went down the stairs together, and out into the cold afternoon. Eleanor walked to the nearest corner, and stood there for a moment. The city moved around her, the traffic, the people, the ordinary noise of an afternoon in November. She thought about Claudette across the table, and the way the questions had been framed, and she thought about the inventory of Eleanor's life, and she thought about the phrase, Clement Street, in Claudette's voice. There was a kind of person, Eleanor had learned, who arranged their relationships like chess pieces, every move calculated, every position considered, every other person on the board, a piece to be advanced against, or removed. These people were not stupid. In fact, they were often extremely intelligent. What they lacked was the ability to conceive of other people as anything other than positions in the game. Claudette was this kind of person. And Claudette, Eleanor was beginning to understand, had been managing the board around Oliver Hargrove for a long time. Long enough to know exactly where to press, long enough to have anticipated Eleanor's presence on the committee, and arranged her own position accordingly. Eleanor walked home. She thought about it on the way. She thought about whether to tell Oliver, and decided she would not yet. Because telling Oliver meant asking him to do something about it, or at minimum, knowing she had told him, and he had done nothing, and neither of those outcomes was useful right now. She was going to manage this herself. She had managed more complicated rooms than Claudette Barrow. The second committee meeting was 3 weeks later. This time Claudette arrived before Eleanor, which was a change in position. She had also, Eleanor noted from the looks on several faces when she came in, been in the room for a while before the meeting started. Eleanor took her seat and ran the meeting, and paid attention to the room, with the full attention she always brought to rooms. At the end of the meeting, when people were talking informally, one of the committee members, a man named Peter, pleasant, earnest, devoted to the literacy work, said something slightly odd to Eleanor. He asked her how she found the transition period, and whether there were any aspects of the Foundation's work that she found outside her expertise. He asked it perfectly kindly. He was not being hostile. He was repeating a conversation he had already had with someone else, and he had absorbed enough of its frame that it was now informing his question. Eleanor answered him clearly and warmly, and moved the conversation to something productive, but she filed the interaction away. Something had been said about her, somewhere between this meeting and the last one. She needed to find out what. She did not find out from the committee. She found out from Vera Lawson, who had, as Vera Lawson always did, excellent sources through channels that were entirely her own. Claudette Barrow, Vera told her over tea in the staff room on a Friday, in the satisfied tone of someone delivering exactly the information required, has been telling people on the Foundation board that you are charming and well-intentioned, but perhaps a little out of your depth in a committee leadership role. She mentioned specifically that your background, while admirable, is perhaps more suited to working with children than to the kind of organizational thinking the Foundation requires. Eleanor drank her tea. She has also, Vera continued, looking at Eleanor steadily, apparently suggested to at least 2 people that the only reason you were approached for the chair role was because of your connection to the Hargrove family. Eleanor set down her cup. She is thorough, Eleanor said. She is thorough, Vera agreed. She has been doing it from what I can tell, since October. Since before the gala, she started with the Hargroves social circle and has been working outward. Eleanor absorbed this. Since before the gala, she repeated. Yes, Vera said. The rumor at the gala was not the beginning. It was simply the most visible moment of something that had already been going on. Eleanor thought about this. She thought about standing at the champagne table talking to Oliver, and the way Claudette had materialized so quickly and precisely. She thought about the conversation she had overheard near the powder room, which had cited Claudette as the source. She thought about how quickly the story had moved, and how well-formed it had been. She planned it, Eleanor said. Not a question. She planned it, Vera said. Eleanor looked at the staff room wall, which had a poster on it about the importance of reading for pleasure that one of the Year 4 children had made. Thank you, Vera, she said. What are you going to do? Vera asked. Think, Eleanor said, carefully. She thought carefully for 2 days. She thought while she was teaching, and while she was marking, and while she was walking to and from school in the mornings and evenings. She ran through the situation with the same methodical care she used when she was working out how to help a child who was stuck, not attacking the problem directly, but circling it, finding its edges, understanding its shape before deciding where to apply pressure. On the Saturday morning, she got up, told Mrs. Fenn she would not be in for lunch, and took the bus to the neighborhood where the Whitmore Foundation had its secondary office, which was also where, she had learned from Patrice, Claudette Barrow volunteered on alternating Saturdays. She waited outside. Claudette came out at 11:15, carrying a bag and talking to someone on a mobile phone. She saw Eleanor and stopped. Something moved very fast across her face, surprise, and then the replacement of surprise with the composed smile she always wore. She said something brief into the phone and ended the call. Eleanor walked toward her. Eleanor, Claudette said. What a surprise. I would like 5 minutes, Eleanor said. Claudette considered this. Of course, she said. There is a coffee shop around the corner. They went to the coffee shop. They sat at a small table near the back. Neither of them ordered anything. Eleanor folded her hands on the table. She looked at Claudette directly. I know what you have been doing, she said. Not the guesses, the specifics. I know when it started, and what you have said, and to whom. I am not here to threaten you with that information. Claudette was very still. I am here, Eleanor said, to tell you that I understand why you did it, and that understanding it does not mean I am going to pretend it is not happening. Claudette said nothing. You were expecting something from Oliver, Eleanor said, something that did not happen, and that was painful. I understand that. I am not dismissing it. But what you have been doing since then has been directed at me, and I am not the person who made that decision, and I am not going to be managed by it. Claudette's expression was carefully composed, but her hands, Eleanor noticed, were flat on the table in a way that people's hands went when they were trying very hard to stay controlled. You are very direct, Claudette said. I always have been, Eleanor said. It saves time. A beat of silence. What do you want? Claudette asked. Nothing from you, Eleanor said. I do not want an apology. I do not want a retraction. What I want is for you to know that I know, because I have found that people who know they have been seen tend to make different decisions afterward. Not always better ones, but different. She stood up. I will see you at the next committee meeting, Eleanor said. She walked out. She stood on the pavement outside for a moment in the cold, bright Saturday air. Her heart was doing the thing it sometimes did after a difficult conversation, beating faster than usual, which was simply the body's way of registering that something significant had happened, even when the surface had been very calm. She started walking toward the bus stop. She thought about whether she had done the right thing. She thought about it for the whole bus ride home, and she decided that she had, not because the outcome was guaranteed to be the right one, but because staying silent about something you knew was always a choice in favor of the person who was counting on your silence. She was not in the habit of making that choice. Oliver was in the library when she got home. He looked up from his papers when she came in. Good morning? He asked. Productive, she said. He looked at her for a moment with an attention she had grown accustomed to, the kind that noticed things without requiring them to be explained. Tea? He said. Please, she said, and sat down in her chair by the window. She did not tell him where she had been, or what she had done. She decided she would tell him eventually, when the timing was right, when the full shape of it was clearer. For now it was enough to be home, which was a word she was only recently beginning to apply to Alverton Square, and to have handled something difficult in the way she had always handled difficult things, directly, and alone, and without making it anyone else's problem first. The kettle boiled in the kitchen. Oliver appeared in the doorway a few minutes later with 2 cups. He set one on the table beside her chair. She looked up at him. He went back to his papers. Eleanor picked up her tea and looked out at the garden, and she thought about Claudette sitting in the coffee shop after she had left, and she thought about the committee, and she thought about all the rooms she had walked into that were not built for her, and that she had moved through anyway. And then she set those thoughts down, as she had learned to set things down when they had been looked at enough, and picked up the book that was on the table beside her, and read until lunch. It was Oliver who found out, 3 weeks later. He found out the way that things were usually found out in his world, not through any dramatic revelation, but through the accumulation of small details that arrived from separate directions and eventually formed a pattern too clear to ignore. A comment from Edward, a look from his mother at a dinner that lasted a fraction of a second too long, a mention, in passing, from someone at his club, of Claudette's name in connection with the foundation. He sat with these details for several days. He turned them over in the way he turned over things that troubled him, methodically, without rush, looking for the shape underneath. And then one evening, on a Tuesday, their dinner night, he looked up from his plate and said, "Tell me about Claudette and the committee." Eleanor did not look surprised. She set down her fork with the quiet precision she brought to every action. She picked up her wine glass. She looked at him. "What do you know?" she asked. "Enough," he said, "to understand that you handled something several weeks ago without telling me about it. And I would like to understand why." She looked at him for a moment. "Because it was mine to handle," she said. "It became mine when it involved someone I know. Does that mean I need your permission to handle things that involve people from your life?" she asked, and there was nothing combative in her voice, simply the clear, direct quality of a person who was asking a genuine question. He thought about this. "No," he said, "but it means I would have wanted to know." She was quiet for a moment. Then she told him. All of it. The committee, the questions Claudette had framed, what Vera had found out, the coffee shop on a Saturday morning. Oliver listened without interrupting. This was one of the things she had noticed about him. He was genuinely capable of listening to a full account before responding, which was rarer than it should have been. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "You went alone," he said. "Yes," she said. "To tell her that you knew." "Yes," she said. He looked at his wine glass, then back at her. His expression was not angry. It was something more complicated than that, something that moved between admiration and something like frustration, the two of them arriving in the same moment. "You should have told me," he said. "Would you have let me handle it myself?" she asked. The silence that followed this question was entirely honest. They both knew what the silence meant. "Probably not," he said. "That is why I did not tell you first," she said. "Not because I was keeping it from you. Because you would have taken it over, and it was not yours to take over." He looked at her. "I would have had every intention of protecting you," he said. "I know," she said, "and I am telling you now, so that you know what happened, which is what you asked for. But I need you to understand that I am not someone who needs to be protected from conversations. I need you to understand that I am capable of walking into a room where someone has decided to be difficult, and walking out again, with the situation managed. I know you are capable of it," he said. "Then let me be," she said. Another silence. A different kind. He refilled her wine glass. She watched him do it. His face had the quality it sometimes had when he was revising something internally, not changing his position entirely, but accommodating new information into it. "What did she say?" he asked, "after you told her?" "She asked me what I wanted," Eleanor said. "I told her I did not want anything from her. I told her I wanted her to know that I knew, because people who know they have been seen tend to behave differently." "And has she?" Eleanor considered. The last committee meeting was the most professionally appropriate she has been. She asked one question, and it was a genuine question about the budget. She left immediately after. Oliver was quiet. "You have rendered me speechless," he said. She looked at him. "You are not speechless. You are still talking." "I am still talking," he acknowledged. "But internally I am very quiet." She did look at him properly then, and the thing that moved across her face was something softer than her usual expression, something that appeared very briefly, and then was composed back into something steadier, but had been there long enough for him to see it. "I should have told you sooner," she said. "Not before I went, but after." "Yes," he said. "I am still learning which things to share, and which things to carry," she said. "This is relatively new, all of this." She gestured slightly, meaning the table and the house and the Tuesday dinners and all of it. "I know," he said. "I am still learning too." She looked at him as though she had not quite expected this admission. "Are you?" she said. "Every day," he said, without the faintest idea what I am doing. She was quiet. Then she picked up her fork. "That is reassuring, actually," she said. "I am glad," he said. They finished dinner. Mrs. Fenn cleared the plates. They moved to the sitting room, which was something they had begun doing on Tuesday evenings without formally agreeing to. The shift from the dining room to the sitting room, with its larger chairs, and its quieter light, and its bookshelves, that had now been reorganized twice, because they had each added books to them, and the original organization had become insufficient. Eleanor sat in her usual chair. Oliver sat in his. The fire was on. The room was very quiet. "I am going to tell you something," Oliver said. She looked up from the book she had picked up. "When I heard Claudette's name, and began putting things together," he said, "my first feeling was not anger at her, or not only that, my first feeling was something else." Eleanor waited. "I was struck by the fact that you had dealt with all of it," he said, and said nothing, and continued to chair the committee, and continued to come home on your ordinary schedule, and eat dinner on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and make tea in the morning, and mark exercise books in the evening, and none of it had any visible mark on you. And I found that I was—" He stopped. He was finding the word. "Moved," he said. "That is the word. I was moved by it." Eleanor looked at him. "I do not make a display of things," she said. "I know," he said. "That is what moved me." The fire shifted and settled. The room was warm and quiet. Eleanor looked down at her book. She did not read it for a moment. She was looking at the page without seeing it. Then she looked up. "Oliver." "Yes," he said. "Thank you," she said, "for being angry on my behalf, even if I did not ask you to." "You are welcome," he said, "even though you clearly did not need it." "I did not need it," she agreed, "but it was still worth knowing." They sat in the quiet room, and the fire burned, and the evening went where evenings went, slowly, and without ceremony, and when Eleanor went upstairs at 9:30, she said good night in the ordinary way she always did. But at the top of the stairs she paused for a moment, and Oliver, looking up from the book he had picked up, caught that pause, and understood it was a pause of a particular kind, the kind a person made when they were carrying something they had not expected to be carrying, and were not quite sure yet what to do with it. He looked back at his book. He was carrying something similar. Neither of them said so, but it was there, between the lines of the evening, in the way that things were increasingly there between them, unspoken, undeniable, and patient. The rain started on a Wednesday in February and did not stop until Friday. Eleanor walked to school on Wednesday with her umbrella, which had a broken spoke that she had been intending to fix for 2 months. The broken spoke meant that one sector of the umbrella did not properly close, and the rain came through in a thin, persistent stream directly onto her left shoulder. By the time she reached the school gates, her coat was damp in a spreading circle that she did not have the time or the warmth to mind about. She taught her class. She ran the Wednesday staff meeting. She marked 3 sets of exercise books during the lunch hour because the stack had become intimidating. She answered 6 parent emails and had 1 conversation with the head teacher about the spring term performance that required her full attention. She did not think about Oliver until she was packing her bag at 3:20 and discovered that the rain, rather than having eased during the hours she had been inside, had become distinctly more serious. She stood at the classroom window for a moment and watched it fall. There was a sound from the corridor, and then Miss Lawson appeared in the doorway, with the satisfied expression of someone who has recently seen something worth reporting. "You have a visitor," Vera Lawson said. Eleanor turned. "I have a—" "Near the front entrance," Vera said. "I would describe him as tall, well-dressed, slightly self-conscious about being in a primary school, and carrying what appears to be the book you left in the car on Sunday. Eleanor looked at Vera. Vera's expression contained multiple things, none of which she was attempting to disguise. "Thank you, Vera," Eleanor said. "Do not mention it," Vera said, and disappeared with the air of someone who intended to mention it extensively. Eleanor collected her bag. She walked down the corridor to the front entrance. Oliver was standing near the door, in his coat, holding a book she recognized, the one she had left on the back seat of the car last Sunday, and had not thought about since. He looked, as Vera had observed, slightly self-conscious about being in a primary school. There was something slightly different about him in this context. The ease he had in his own world, the boardrooms and the dinner tables and the rooms where he was known, was absent here. Here he was simply a man standing in a hallway with a book. Eleanor found this, unexpectedly, the most human she had seen him. "You came to return a book," she said. "I was passing," he said, more or less. She looked at him. "You were not passing Hartfield Primary on your way from Alverton Square to anywhere you needed to be today." "I was taking the long route," he said. She looked outside. The rain had not improved. "Come on," she said. They went out through the main door and stood under the narrow awning above the entrance. The awning was designed to accommodate the width of one adult in a coat, not two, and they were both standing under it with the rain coming down steadily 3 inches from their feet. Oliver opened the book and showed her the page she had marked. "You marked this passage. I read it on the way. Without my permission," she said. "Without asking," he agreed. "I am sorry. What did you think of it?" she asked. "I thought the author was trying to say 2 things at once and was not sure which one was true," he said. She looked at him. This was exactly what she thought too. She had been going to tell him that on Sunday, and had not found the right moment. "Yes," she said. "That is exactly right." He looked at her. The rain was consistent and entirely indifferent to the two of them standing under the awning. Someone inside the school had turned on the lights in the corridor, and the yellow warmth of them fell through the glass door panels onto the wet pavement. "How was your day?" he asked. She thought about this. It was not a question he usually asked. Their conversations at home were substantial, but rarely began with the ordinary mechanics of the day. "Complicated," she said. "Arthur had a setback." "The boy who reads about trains," Oliver said. He had remembered. She had not expected him to have remembered. "He had a bad morning and shut himself down entirely," she said. "Would not try. I could see him thinking about the effort and deciding it was not worth it, which sometimes happens, which is part of the process, but it is still difficult to watch." "What did you do?" "I sat beside him and read the train book out loud for 10 minutes while he looked at the window," she said. "And then I said, 'Your turn.' And he did." Oliver looked at her. "You sat beside him," he said. "You did not push." "Pushing is almost never the answer," she said. "With children or anyone else." He was quiet. She looked at the rain. "How was yours?" "There is a supplier in the north who has decided that deadlines are a suggestion," he said. "I have been on the telephone to him 3 times today. He is cheerful and entirely unmoved by my concern." "Have you tried sitting beside him and reading train books?" she asked. He almost smiled. Actually almost smiled, in the way he did when something caught him off guard. "I have not tried that yet," he said. They stood in the rain-adjacent quiet. The street beyond the awning was empty. The school behind them had the muffled, settling sound of an institution at the end of its day. "Eleanor," he said. "Yes," she said. "I want to ask you something, and I want you to answer honestly." "When do I do otherwise?" she said. "Never," he said. "That is why I am asking." He looked straight ahead at the rain. "Are you content? Here. This arrangement, all of it." She considered the question with the same careful attention she gave everything. "Not content, exactly," she said. He looked at her. "Content is too passive," she said. "I am interested. I find myself interested in where all of this is going, which is more than I expected to feel in February, when we agreed to this in November." He was quiet. "And you?" she said. "I have not been this present in my own life in several years," he said. "I do not know exactly what that means, but it is true." She looked at him. He was still looking at the rain. "Oliver," she said. He turned. "The first night I came to this school," she said. "Not tonight. The gala. I spent the whole evening feeling like the room had been built for a different shape of person than me. And then I met you at the champagne table and I thought, this person is present. Whatever else he is actually here, in the conversation. He listened. That is a rarer quality than people think, she said. He looked at her steadily. Something had shifted in his expression. Not dramatically, not in the way things shifted in performances of emotion, but in the real and quiet way that things shifted when something landed that was true. I should tell you something, he said. Tell me, she said. The kiss, he said. That night, in the corridor. She waited. I told you it was to stop the story from spreading, he said. And it was. That was a true thing. But it was also, he stopped, found the words. It was also because I had been in a room full of people all evening, and the only conversation I wanted to be having was the one I had at the champagne table. And you were standing in that corridor, looking like you had already decided to walk away and be entirely fine about it, and I was not fine about it. Eleanor stood very still. So it was not entirely strategic, she said. It was not entirely strategic, he said. The rain fell. I kept the newspaper, she said. He looked at her. The one with the photograph. The society column. I kept it. He was quiet for a long moment. Why? He said. Because, she said, I was angry about the whole situation. I was very angry. And I kept the newspaper to remind myself that I had a right to be angry. And then somewhere along the way, I was looking at it one evening, and I realized I was not angry about it anymore. And I did not know what I was instead. And I thought I had better keep it until I figured out what that meant. He looked at her. The light from inside the school fell across his face, making his expression very clear. Have you figured it out? He asked. I am working on it, she said. He nodded, as though that were an answer that was not only acceptable but actually correct. Eleanor, he said. Yes, she said. He held out the book. She took it. Their hands did not quite touch, except briefly, at the edge of the cover, which was perhaps accidental, and perhaps was not. Come on, she said. The car must be around the corner, and it is getting colder. They walked out into the rain. Neither of them opened an umbrella. 3 months after the wedding, in the first week of February, the trouble came. It did not announce itself. That was the thing about the kind of trouble that genuinely threatened something. It arrived looking like an ordinary morning. An email. A phone call. Edward's voice on the other end of the line, not panicked, because Edward never panicked, but carrying the particular flatness that people's voices took on when they were delivering very bad news and were trying to be professional about it. The email had gone to the board of the Hargrove manufacturing firm that Monday morning. It was from a man named Colin Adler, who had been a senior partner in the firm's commercial supply chain for 11 years, and who had, it turned out, been quietly redirecting supplier payments through a separate holding company he controlled for the last 4 of those years. The email was not from Colin. It was from the accountants who had found it. Oliver took the call from Edward in the study at 8:15, while Eleanor was at school. He sat at his desk for a few minutes afterward, very still, thinking through what he had just been told with the methodical efficiency he brought to problems. Then he called his mother. Margaret's response to crisis was always the same. She became more precise. She gathered information. She was silent on the telephone while he spoke, and then she said, I will call Pemberton, who was the family's solicitor, this afternoon. The priority is the accounts, Oliver said. If the redirection has been running for 4 years. Pemberton will know, Margaret said. Oliver. Yes, he said. How bad is it? He had been honest with her all his life, in the moments when it mattered. I do not know yet, he said. It could be managed, or it could be very bad indeed. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, come for dinner tonight, which meant, be with family, be somewhere solid. I will let you know, he said. He spent the morning in the office with Edward and the firm's internal accountants, going through the preliminary documentation. It was, as these things often were, worse than the first account, and not as bad as the worst case. The redirected payments were substantial. Not enough to threaten the firm's core operations, but enough to require significant and immediate attention, and enough, and this was what mattered as much as the money, to create a story. The story appeared in the business press by Thursday. Oliver had known it would. He had not been able to prevent it. Someone had talked, and by Thursday morning, the headline was clear enough. Hargrove partner fraud case. Investigation underway. His name was in it. Not as the wrongdoer, as the company's head, but proximity to the headline was enough. By Friday, 2 families who had been warm to him at events had suddenly become unavailable. One board member sent a letter suggesting it might be prudent to step back from certain public commitments while the matter was resolved. A luncheon invitation that had been confirmed was quietly withdrawn. This was how it worked. He had watched it happen to other people and understood the mechanism perfectly. It was not personal. It was simply that the people who navigated social and professional life in this city operated on a principle of measured association, and measured association meant you did not stand close to something uncertain until the uncertainty had resolved. He sat with this in the evenings, and worked through the documents, and called Edward, and called Pemberton, and called the accounts team, and did not sleep particularly well. Eleanor noticed. He knew she noticed, because she was observant in a way that was quiet and total, and because she was someone who paid attention to rooms and the people in them, and she lived in the same house as he did. She did not ask him about it directly. Not at first. She simply continued her ordinary schedule, school, home, marking, tea, dinner on their evenings, and was present in the way she always was, which was steady and honest and without performance. On a Tuesday, 3 days after the headline, they ate dinner, and the conversation moved differently. He was less present than usual. He was thinking about the documents that were waiting in the study, and the call he had to make to the supplier in the north, who was going to want reassurances the company had the liquidity to keep his contract. Eleanor set down her fork. "Tell me what is happening," she said. He looked at her. He had not told her. Not because he was keeping it from her, but because he was still inside it, and the inside of something difficult was not always the best place to explain it from. But she had asked. He told her. She listened the way she always listened, with her full attention, her hands still, her face serious. She did not interrupt. She asked 2 questions, both specific, both useful. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "How long will the investigation take?" she said. "Pemberton thinks 3 to 4 months, if they move efficiently," he said. "And in the meantime," she said. "In the meantime," he said, "we demonstrate that the firm is sound, and that the problem was one person's actions, not a structural failure." She looked at him. "What can I do?" He looked at her. "I do not need," he began. "I am not asking what you need," she said. "I am asking what I can do." He understood the distinction. She was not offering help as a kindness to be accepted or declined. She was establishing, in the clear and practical way she established everything, that she was in the situation alongside him and intended to be useful. "The dinner at the Forsyths on Friday," he said. "I was considering not going." "Why?" she said. "Because the Forsyths have already told Pemberton they are reconsidering their charitable donation to the foundation in light of—" "Then we go," she said simply. He looked at her. "If you do not go," she said, "the story is that you are avoiding the room. If we go, the story is that you have nothing to hide, which you do not. It will be uncomfortable," he said. "I have sat through uncomfortable dinners before," she said. "I can sit through one more." He was quiet. "Oliver," she said, "you have not done anything wrong. That matters, and it should be visible." He thought about this. He thought about the logic of it, which was sound, and he thought about the thing beyond the logic. The fact that she was sitting across the table from him on a Tuesday evening and had asked what she could do, and he understood that the question was real, and the offer was real, and the intention behind both of them was something that had no calculation in it at all. "All right," he said. "Friday. The Forsyths." She picked up her fork. "Good," she said. Friday came. Eleanor wore a dark dress. She was composed and warm, and talked to people with the same clear, interested attention she brought to every conversation. She asked the right questions, and listened to the answers, and was, as far as anyone at the Forsyth dinner could tell, entirely relaxed. She introduced herself to people she had not met, with a simple directness that made the conversation move forward naturally. She sat beside Oliver at the table, and when the conversation turned, as it inevitably did, to business and to the newspaper story, She did not stiffen or disengage. She said, quietly and without drama, that investigations of this kind took time, and that the outcome would speak for itself, and then she changed the subject to something else, with a skill that looked entirely natural, and was in fact extremely deliberate. Oliver watched her from across a conversation, and thought about the first time he had seen her, standing at the champagne table, with her hand around a glass, and her back straight, and her face arranged into the kind of composure that was not hiding anything, simply choosing what to offer. She had been like this from the beginning, he thought. He had simply not understood how constant it was. Margaret was at the dinner too, because Margaret was always at the dinners that mattered. Toward the end of the evening, she found Eleanor near the window, in a moment when Oliver was on the other side of the room. Oliver saw them talking. He could not hear what was said. He watched his mother's face, and Eleanor's face from across the room. His mother's expression was the one she used when she was revising an opinion she had held for some time, and was not entirely comfortable about the revision. Eleanor's expression was its ordinary expression, calm, clear, present. They talked for about 5 minutes. Then his mother nodded, once, and moved away. He made his way to Eleanor's side. "What did she say?" he asked quietly. "She told me I wore my composure like a professional," Eleanor said. "I think she meant it as a compliment." "From my mother," he said. "That is the highest form of compliment available." Eleanor looked at him. "She also said that she had misjudged me initially, and that she was not in the habit of admitting that, and she would prefer I not make much of it." He went quiet. "I told her that I appreciated her saying so, and that we did not need to speak of it again," Eleanor said. She seemed relieved. Oliver looked across the room to where his mother was now talking to the Forsyths with her most precise and authoritative expression. "Eleanor," he said. "Yes," she said. "I want to say something." She waited. "I do not have the right word for what you are to me right now," he said. "That is not a declaration, or not only that. It is that you are in all of this with me, and you chose that. You could have kept the arrangement at arm's length. You could have done the Tuesdays and Thursdays and the formal appearances, and been entirely within what we agreed to. And instead you are here, on a Friday, telling my mother she does not need to feel uncomfortable about her own honesty." Eleanor looked at him for a long moment. "Oliver," she said, "I do not do arm's length." "I know that now," he said. "You should have known it from the champagne table," she said. The corner of his mouth moved. "I was paying attention," he said. "I think I knew it then. I just did not know what to do with it." "And now?" she asked. He looked at her. The room moved around them, the voices, the light, the careful social machinery of a dinner party, and inside all of it, at the center of his attention, was this woman, standing beside him, who had walked into a room she had not been built for, and had become, quietly and without announcement, indispensable to it. "I am working on it," he said, using her own words back at her. The corner of her mouth moved, the real one this time, the one she did not often let all the way out. "Good," she said. They stayed until the end of the dinner. They thanked the Forsyths. They walked out into the night together. In the car on the way home, Eleanor rested her head back against the seat and closed her eyes for a moment. She was tired. It had been a long week and a long evening, and she had been fully present through all of it. Oliver watched the road. "Eleanor," he said. She said, without opening her eyes. "Thank you," he said. She did not answer immediately. Then she said, without opening her eyes, "You would do the same." He thought about this. He thought about all the ways she was right. "Yes," he said, "I would." She was quiet the rest of the way home. He thought she might have fallen asleep. When the car stopped on Alverton Square, she sat up and gathered herself, and they went inside. At the bottom of the stairs she said good night in her ordinary way. But at the landing she paused, the same way she had paused before, and he was watching, as he always was now, and this time she turned. She looked at him from the landing. "Oliver," she said. "Yes," he said. "I am glad it was you," she said, "at the champagne table. I am glad you were the one who talked to me first." He looked up at her. "So am I," he said. She turned and went upstairs. He stood in the hallway for a moment. The house was very quiet around him. He could hear the tick of the clock in the study, and the small sound of the city outside. He went into the study and sat down and looked at the papers on his desk. He did not work for some time. He thought about everything that had led to this house, and this evening, and the woman at the top of those stairs, and he thought about how none of it had been planned, and how that was, in its strange and complicated way, the most right thing about all of it. The case was resolved in March, not with drama, not with a verdict or a courtroom or the kind of moment that makes a story feel finished. It resolved the way most real things resolved, through the accumulation of documented evidence, the work of solicitors and accountants, the slow and grinding machinery of formal process that eventually produced a result that said, in clear and legally precise language, what Oliver had known from the beginning, that the fraud had been committed entirely by one person acting alone, that the firm's leadership had no knowledge of it, and that the company's accounts, once the redirected funds were traced and accounted for, were sound. Pemberton called on a Tuesday morning with the final determination. Oliver read the document that afternoon and sat with it for a while. The board held a brief meeting on Wednesday. Edward shook his hand afterward in the way that meant something more than a professional conclusion. Oliver's mother, who attended the meeting in her role as the family's non-executive board representative, said very little during the meeting, and then said, when it was over, "That is done then," in the tone she used when she had been containing something for some time and was now releasing it. Oliver went home. Eleanor was already there. She had been home for an hour. He could tell from the teacup on the kitchen table, and the bag dropped near the hall table in the way she dropped it when she had come in, and immediately put the kettle on, which she did on days that required something immediate and warm. He came into the kitchen. She looked up. She read his face the way she read everything. "It is over," she said. "Yes," he said. She stood up. She did not say anything else immediately. She simply came to the other side of the kitchen counter and stood near him, and he understood that this was her version of the gesture, not demonstrative, not a performance, simply present, the way she was always present when it mattered. They stood there for a moment. "Tea?" she said. "Please," he said. She made it. They sat at the kitchen table, which was where they had begun to sit for conversations that were not dinners, the informal conversations, the ones that did not require the dining room ceremony. She asked. "The story? Yes, in some form, but differently now." He looked at the table. "People will readjust. The ones who stepped back will step forward again and behave as though they never moved. A few of them will mean it. Most of them will simply be managing their association again." "And the ones who stayed?" she said. He looked at her. She was asking about the Forsyths and the 2 or 3 others who had not adjusted their relationship to him during the difficult months. She was asking, he understood, about the value he placed on that distinction. "They are the ones who matter," he said. She nodded. She held her teacup in both hands and looked out the window at the garden, where the first signs of spring were appearing in the hedgerow, small, tentative, not yet certain they were committed to being seen. "Oliver," she said. "Yes," he said. "I want to go back to the gala in October," she said. He looked at her. "The Whitmore Gala," she said. "This year. I want to go." "All right," he said. "Not because of anything strategic," she said. "Not because of how it looks or what it means publicly. I want to go because it was where I met you, and because I spent most of that evening feeling like I was in the wrong room, and I would like to spend this one feeling differently." He was quiet for a moment. "We will go," he said. She looked at him. Her expression was the one she had when something had been decided and she was satisfied with the decision, the look she probably had when a problem that had been complicated resolved into something clear. "Good," she said. The afternoon moved forward. Eleanor took her bag upstairs. Oliver went to the study and read through the Pemberton documents again. Not from necessity, but from the satisfaction of reading a thing that had ended well. He made 2 calls, one to Edward, one brief and surprised call to the supplier in the north, who had apparently already seen the news and was cheerful about it. That evening, which was a Tuesday, they ate dinner at the kitchen table instead of the dining room, because neither of them had suggested the dining room and the kitchen was warm and the conversation was easy. Eleanor talked about Arthur, who had had what she described as a remarkable week. He had not only read the train book independently, but had, on Friday, sought out a second book from the classroom shelf, without being prompted. He had simply walked to the shelf, considered the options, and chosen something, which Eleanor said was the true measure of the thing taking hold. Oliver listened to this, and found that something in him settled in a way that had nothing to do with the resolved case, or the calls, or the documents. "You love that work," he said. She looked at him. "Yes," she said. "Not the institution of it," he said. "Not the career of it, the actual work. Arthur and the train books." "Yes," she said. "It shows," he said. She held his gaze for a moment. "Is that a good thing?" "It is an extraordinary thing," he said. She looked at the table, then back at him. Then she said, in the quieter and more undefended way she occasionally spoke, "I have spent a long time making sure the work was enough, making sure I did not want things I had not been given permission to want." He was very still. "And now?" he asked. "Now," she said, "I am learning that wanting things is not the same as expecting them, and that the wanting is allowed, that I am allowed it." He understood what she was saying beneath the words, and what she was saying was not small, and he did not treat it as small. "You are allowed it," he said. "All of it." She looked at him for a long moment. The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, the evening had come fully down, and the garden was dark. "Oliver," she said. "Yes," he said. "I need to tell you something." He waited. "I kept the newspaper," she said. "I told you that in February." "Yes," he said. "What I did not tell you," she said, "was that I stopped keeping it for the reason I started keeping it, quite a long time ago. I stopped keeping it as a reminder of what I was angry about, and I started keeping it because every time I looked at it I thought about the corridor and the way you looked at me, and I felt something I was not sure I had permission to feel." He was very still. "And I have decided," she said, "that I have permission." He looked at her across the kitchen table in their house, which had been strange, and was now not strange, which had been an arrangement, and was now something his language did not have a word precise enough to hold. "Eleanor," he said. "Yes," she said. He stood up. She stood up. The kitchen table was between them, and then it was not, because they had both moved, and he had his hands on either side of her face, which was warm under his palms, and she was looking at him with the full and fearless attention she brought to everything. "I want to tell you," he said, "that I have been in love with you since approximately the champagne table." She looked at him. "Approximately," she said. "The flowers conversation specifically," he said. "When you said the arrangement would cover your grocery bill for 6 weeks, if you were careful. I was entirely done at that point." The corner of her mouth moved. Not the small one, the full one, the one she reserved for things that were genuinely, privately wonderful. "That is very specific," she said. "I am a specific person," he said. She put one hand against his chest and looked up at him and said, "I should tell you that I am very bad at this, historically. At the allowing myself to feel things portion of any relationship. I know," he said. "I have been watching you practice it for months." "And?" she said. "And you are getting considerably better at it," he said. She laughed. Actually laughed, the full sound of it. And then his hands were still holding her face, and she was still laughing softly, and his forehead was against hers, and the kitchen was warm, and the house was theirs, and the evening was entirely, completely, irreversibly, the kind of evening that changed everything, before and after it. "Oliver," she said. "Yes," he said. "We should probably talk about this properly," she said. "There should be a real conversation." "Yes," he said. "Tomorrow," she said. "Tomorrow," he agreed. They stood there in the kitchen for another moment. He thought about the gala in October, and the corridor, and the photograph in the newspaper, and 3 visits to a flat above a dry cleaning shop. He thought about the library on Sunday mornings, and the teacup he had refilled, and the exercise books in the evening, and the Friday dinner at the Forsyths. He thought about all of it, the entirety of the strange and stumbled into thing they had built, and he thought that it was the most honest thing he had ever been a part of. "Eleanor," he said. "Yes," she said. "I am very glad it was the flowers conversation," he said. She laughed again, quietly, and it was the best sound in the room. October came back the way October always did in this city, with cold mornings and yellow light, and the particular quality of afternoon that felt both bright and ending. The leaves in the garden on Alverton Square had been turning for 2 weeks, and Eleanor had a habit, which Oliver had noticed and found unreasonably charming, of going out into the garden on mornings, when the light was right, and standing there for a few minutes before school, simply to look at the trees. He watched her do this on the Thursday morning before the gala. She was in her work clothes already, her coat half-buttoned, her bag over her shoulder, and she had stopped at the garden gate with her face tipped slightly upward and her eyes on the plane tree in the corner that had gone entirely amber. He did not go out to her. He simply watched from the kitchen window until she turned and came back inside, with a slightly distracted expression that cleared when she came through the door and found him with 2 cups of tea. "The light this morning," she said. "I know," he said. She took her tea and stood beside him at the window, and they looked at the garden together for a moment, without saying anything. This had become, over the months since March, the most characteristic thing about them, the ease of not having to say things. He had not known, before Eleanor, that silence between 2 people could carry as much as conversation. He had not known that the absence of performance could feel more full than all the rooms he had spent his life performing in. They had talked, as she had said they should, the morning after the kitchen, properly, over breakfast, with everything on the table between them. She had been honest about the fear of it, of wanting something real and losing it, of letting herself need something. He had been honest about the years of rooms where he had been known for his name and his business, and not much else, and the strange and anchoring experience of being known, genuinely, for the first time, by a person who had no investment in the version of him that rooms produced. They had agreed, in the practical and clear way they agreed to things, to proceed, to see what this was, to tell each other when something was not working. What had followed was 8 months that Oliver would describe, if pressed to describe them, as the most specifically, deliberately inhabited 8 months of his life. He had learned what Eleanor found funny, and what she found intolerable, and what she valued above most things, and what she could not take seriously, even when she tried. She had learned the same about him. They argued occasionally, about things that mattered, and the arguments were clean, and ended clearly, and left them, consistently, closer to each other than they had been before. Margaret had noticed. Margaret noticed everything, and what she noticed, she filed and revised and eventually admitted, in her fashion. She had said to Oliver in September, over lunch, that she thought Eleanor was very good. He had said he thought so too. His mother had said, "I do not mean good as in adequate. I mean good as in good," and Oliver had understood that this was the clearest thing his mother had ever said to him, and had treated it accordingly. They arrived at the Alderton Hotel on a Saturday evening in October, 1 year after the night that had produced all of this. Eleanor was wearing a gown she had chosen herself, dark green, simple, and perfectly right for her. Oliver had his hand at her back as they came through the entrance, and she was looking at the ballroom, with an expression he had not seen on her face before. Not the composed wariness of last year, but something that was simply looking. "The flowers are the same," she said. "Halloway's," he said. "Every year." "One arrangement," she said, with the corner of her mouth moving. "Still at least 6 weeks of groceries." "Probably more," he said. "There has been inflation." She laughed. Quietly. The good one. They moved into the room, and it was different from last year, in every way that mattered. The people who had adjusted their association with Oliver during the difficult months were present, and warm, and behaved as he had predicted, as though no adjustment had ever occurred. Eleanor greeted people she had met over the course of the year, with the genuine ease that came from actually knowing them now, from dinners and foundation meetings and the gradual, undramatic accumulation of being present in a world over time. She talked to Ruth, who ran the literacy charity, for 20 minutes. She talked to George, the retired architect from their table last year, who remembered her, and asked about the school, and listened to the answer, with the attention of a person who was genuinely curious. She talked to Peter from the committee, who had long since revised whatever frame Claudette had given him, and who spoke to her now with the simple directness of a colleague. Claudette was there. She was across the room for most of the evening. She nodded to Eleanor once, across a distance, and Eleanor nodded back, and that was the entirety of it. Oliver watched Eleanor move through the room with the same attention he had been giving her for a year, and he thought about the previous October, and the way she had looked when she came through the entrance of this same room. The composure that was not hiding anything, simply managing the gap between the room and herself. That gap was gone now. He could see it was gone. The room did not have a gap for her anymore. She had filled it in over 12 months of being exactly who she was in every room she walked into, and the room had adjusted, as rooms eventually do, to the fact of a person who refuses to be something other than herself. Near the end of the evening, after dinner, when the dancing had started, and the room had taken on the looser, warmer quality of its later hours, Eleanor found him near the windows. She stood beside him, and they watched the dancing. The Beresfords were there, the couple who had danced in the center of the floor last year, the ones who had been married 53 years. They were dancing again, slowly and entirely absorbed in each other, as though the rest of the room was backdrop. 54 years now, Oliver said. Eleanor looked at them. Do you think they were in a room that was not built for them once? She asked. He thought about this. I think, he said, that they built their own room. She looked at him. Over time, he said. You build the room. You do not find it. You do not wait for someone to hand it to you. You make it the shape that fits. She was quiet for a moment. That is very good, she said. It just came to me, he said. It came to you because it is true, she said. The music shifted to something slower. Around them, more people moved to the floor. The chandeliers threw their warm, extravagant light across the linen, and the flowers, and the people. Eleanor, Oliver said. She looked at him. I would like to dance with you, he said, if you are willing. She looked at the dance floor, then at him. I should tell you, she said, that I am not a good dancer. Neither am I, he said. I have been performing competence in this room for 15 years. I am happy to stop. She looked at him for a moment. Then she took his hand. They went to the floor. The music was something slow and warm that the piano was carrying. He put one hand at her back and held her other hand, and they moved in the approximate direction of the music, which was not technically accomplished but was entirely genuine. You are better than you said, she told him, after a moment. You are considerably better than you said, he said. I may have undersold myself deliberately, she admitted. That, he said, is the first time you have ever done that. The corner of her mouth moved. The full one. The one she gave to things that were genuinely and privately wonderful. They danced. Around them the ballroom moved in its usual patterns, the conversations and the glances, and the careful social machinery of a room where everyone knew everyone. The music continued. The Beresfords were still in the center of the floor, dancing with the ease of 5 decades of practice. And at the edge of the floor, in the same room where a rumor had been built, and a photograph had been taken, and a story had been started that neither of them had written, Oliver Hargrove and Eleanor Voss danced slowly and honestly, and without performing anything for anyone. Except perhaps the Beresfords, who seemed to notice them in the particular way that very happy people noticed other people who had found their way to the same general territory. The older woman caught Eleanor's eye across the floor and smiled at her, not a social smile, not a performed one, a real one, the kind one person gave another when they recognized something true. Eleanor smiled back. And the music played on, and the room was warm, and the chandeliers threw their light across everything equally, across the people who had always belonged in this room, and across the woman who had stood at its entrance 1 year ago, feeling like it had been built for a different shape of person entirely, and who now moved through the center of it, in the arms of the person who had, in a hallway in October, not quite accidentally, changed the direction of everything. It was not a fairy tale. Fairy tales are neat at the edges and resolved at the appointed time, and leave nothing ambiguous for morning. This was something different. This was 2 people who had been honest with each other from the beginning, who had stumbled into something neither of them planned, and had decided, separately and then together, that the stumbling was worth following wherever it led. And where it led was here. A ballroom in October, a slow song, 53 or 54 years of dancing in the center of the floor ahead of them, if they were patient and careful, and continued to do the one thing that had made all the rest of it possible. They told each other the truth. That was all. That was everything. They danced on, and the evening went where evenings go, slowly and without ceremony, into a night that was the beginning of all the mornings that were still to come.